All right, guys, it's me, Liam here from SynFM 90.7 and The Pulse 94.7 The Pulse. And we are here with acclaimed musician and songwriter Midge Ure. He's about to come out to Australia in a few months' time for the Catalog the Hits tour, which is promising a whole bunch of songs from across his career, including hits and just a great bunch of most requested songs as well. So please join me in welcoming on to the show Midge Ure. How are we doing?
We're doing all right, I think. Yeah. Enjoying life.
That's excellent to hear. So congratulations on the new tour as always. What's the reception been for the show underneath this tour for other countries like Europe, obviously back home in the UK as well, and the USA?
You know what? It's actually been really good. I thoroughly enjoyed doing it all. The idea behind the tour is quite simple. You know, catalog. You're looking at not just playing the hits. I mean, they've called it catalog the hits tour. I tried to avoid the hits bit, but that got tagged on somewhere along the line. So catalog just means that I can go back and delve into some earlier bits and pieces that I've done, and try and perform those live. So I've gone back as far as the Rich Kids. So it incorporates Rich Kids, Visage, Ultravox, solo, a lot of different stuff. So it's a much wider spectrum of music selection, and it's been going really well, really well. It's been an absolute joy to do it.
Yeah, and I think one of my favorite things that I discovered from this tour, it was posted onto YouTube. You're talking about the man who sold the world because that was featured in America on that tour. I think it was Band in a Box, and it became your most streamed song on Spotify. So a song that was originally done by David Bowie was B-side to "If I Was" in 1985, first appearing on the Pretty Party soundtrack in 1983. What does a song like that mean to you, man who sold the world?
You know what? Everyone I know in the music industry is in there because they're a fan of someone, because they've been inspired by something else they've heard or something they fell in love with, or music's that wonderful thing that takes you back to, when you hear something randomly on the radio, you instantly go back to who you were hanging out with and what you were wearing and who you fancied, all of those things. And Man Who Sold the World was a massive song for me, just when I was kind of trying to cut my teeth and learning how the music worked. And I did that track as someone gave me a favor. I did a favor for someone. They gave me 24 hours in the studio, and I recorded that version. Never to be heard again until a guy called Hideo Kojima, who's a games manufacturer, a games designer and director, decided he wanted to use that song in his final installment of the game Metal Gear Solid. So when people heard that song, it was timeless. They didn't know it was David Bowie. They didn't know it was me. They just liked that version. So therefore it became the most streamed song that I've ever been associated with. Sad to say it's not my own song.
Yeah, but I mean, there's another case like that on the Gift album with Living in the Past. You've said great things about Ian Anderson, especially Jethro Tull having a rock icon growing up in Scotland. So it's a fantastic choice for a cover, by the way, as well. And having Mark King as well on the album as well. How did you feel Tull impacted, I guess, the same ways David Bowie did growing up in Scotland? And what made you choose such a great bassist like Mark for the song?
Well, you listen to that song. It's in a very odd timing. It's very strange to have something that's in is it 5/4 or 3/4, whatever it is. Because more normally things are 4/4, straightforward, straight down the line, and to hear that kind of slightly jazz thing or prog thing being played on the radio in the late '60s, when I was a kid, it just resonated with me. It just sounded, it was fresh, it was different, it was verging on rock, which you didn't really hear an awful lot on the radio back then in the UK. So I just thought it would be a lovely thing to cover, and especially with Mark King, who's such a phenomenal bass player, and he came in and just tore it up. He played all that lovely slap bass on it, and with his great feel. So yeah, I mean, I'm a fan of other people, and I still have those pinch me moments where you're standing in a room or you're standing on stage, and not only do I know who these people are, but they know who I am, which I find really alien. So I still feel like a kid in a candy shop.
Yeah, you go on to do the performance in 2008 at the Fairport Conventions Festival, obviously Fairport Convention as well. Dave Pegg on bass, who would be with Jethro Tull for a little bit. So a little great sort of homage, I guess, to be performing a song done by Jethro Tull with a member of Jethro Tull on stage.
Absolutely, it was a turn up for the books. I mean, the Fairport festival that they do every year. It's been going for years. It's quite an iconic thing, but it's not just folk music. And they asked me to come along and do an acoustic set, which I did. I did a one man acoustic set on stage, and it was brilliant. Cooperative Festival is just a wonderful thing, and people just love music, and it doesn't have to be any particular genre. And then he said when we were chatting about doing it, they said, "But we know you've done living in the past. We'd love you to do that with the band." And I thought, oh, there's an opportunity to get up there with these guys who are excellent, brilliant musicians who've got more history than I have, and perform that song live, which I don't do very often. I don't perform that one very often. But it was a real joy to stand up there and do it. And the audience reaction was just phenomenal because most of them were slightly elderly and they could remember the original versions. So they all got off on it.
Yeah, maybe we might be lucky enough, depending on the set that we get here in Australia, that we may get it. Because it would have been 40 years since we last heard it with your band back when you did the Gift tour around December or November here in Australia. Speaking of Australia, it's been a regular stop for your tours across the years. First off, supporting Rage and Eden in early '82, and then across the years, as we mentioned, starting in '85 for the solo records with the Gift, and also around about the same time, the East African Tragedy, was for Africa, and then later on in the 2010s and even into the 2020s. What do you most enjoy about coming to Australia each time you come out to visit?
I meet more Scottish people in Australia than I do in Scotland, and that's a lovely thing. I meet people who sometimes who I went to school with, or I haven't seen for forever. And there's something lovely about it. The Australian audiences are very forthcoming. They let their hair down. They enjoy themselves. They don't feel stymied by, the intimidation in venues by, oh, I've got to sit down and, all the way through it. They'll get up and dance if they want to get up and dance. They will let you know if they weren't very happy with what they've just heard. That's great. So that kind of Brit mentality that I think it all stems from, certainly that Scottish mentality that a lot of it stems from, is still there. But the warmth and the humour and the character of Australians is so good. Sadly, last time we were there was just as COVID hit, and we managed to get round most of the venues. But by the time we got to Perth on the way back to the UK, everything was shut down. So we never, ever completed the last tour. So coming back this time, hoping to make up for that.
Excellent. Yeah, Live Aid's just turned 40 very recently. I think it was as of last week. And everyone is a big part of it, and especially you as a co-founder of the Live Aid Band Aid project. What strikes to your memory the most about this historical moment in musical history when someone asks about it? Because you probably would have had a lot of questions on British media and maybe even Australian media very recently about this.
Yeah, well, it's something more. It's become something more than just a musical event. It was a social event. It gave people a platform, to voice their opinions, to voice their discontent, and it changed things beyond what we hoped it would change. We knew there's a reason it was called Band-Aid. Now, Band-Aid is a sticking plaster in America, and it covers a small cut, but it can't fix a severed arm. So it was never set up to fix a problem, but it was set up to try and alleviate what we could of a problem. So for 40 odd years, the Band Aid Trust, the body of people that Bob and I have put together to surround ourselves with, to help us, oversee the spending of the gathering and spending of the funds, are still doing this on a daily basis. So every day we wake up to, 2 or 3 emails requesting funding for projects in sub-Saharan Africa. And of course, every time that record, Do They Know It's Christmas, gets played, Bob and I gave the songwriting royalties of that to the Band Aid Trust. So every time that's played, it generates income. So what we thought was going to be a 6-month project has turned into a 40-year plus project. So I'm very proud of it. I'm very proud of how people used that medium and stood up and heard all those voices come together. And of course, there's been a 3-part documentary the BBC have just done on television, which tells the real story, warts and all, of how the whole thing came about and what it's achieved and what it didn't achieve and all of that stuff. And that's fascinating because I'd forgotten a lot of that stuff. 40 years ago, you do forget things. But also they reran the highlights of the concert. And I was stunned because I didn't see a lot of it. I was behind the stage a lot of the time. And I was stunned at the quality of the artists. The quality of the sound for a live broadcast was just immense. So yeah, it's been a real walk down memory lane, but a real eye-opener for me as well, a real reminder of why it all happened in the first place and how well, everyone managed to pull it off.
Yeah, it's an absolutely just a great part of history, and you're honored enough to even come down to Australia. And how about our own version with Eats? Or how is that, coming to Australia, I guess 40 years ago, to help us out with our own version as well?
Well, it was great. I mean, doing the whole Eats thing was fantastic. Coming down and connecting with a lot of Australian artists was wonderful. But it was a flying visit. I mean, it really was a flying visit. It's I think I was there for 2 days or something, which is a bit. It's not the sort of thing I could do these days. I don't think. All the way down there and then back again within a few days. But yeah, it was glorious, and I've seen the clip many times of us all doing Do They Know It's Christmas with John Farnham and all of that. So yeah, it was a lovely thing to do, and I'm just glad that one of us managed to be able to get there to do it. I think Bob was already, he was either accosting the UN or Margaret Thatcher or whoever it was. So I was very pleased to come down there.
Yeah, it's an absolutely fantastic moment. Of course, we should not forget the Oz for Africa shows that happens because they broadcast it on the BBC, MTV America as well. So we got a lot of great acts, In Excess, Models, LRB as well. A lot of great, fantastic Aussie acts. As they're conducting this interview, as we mentioned before we jumped on, it's the birthday of the late Mick Karn, who famously appeared on After a Fashion from 1983. Tell listeners about the song. What was it to work alongside one of the finest fretless bass players of the 1980s, and how his iconic style contributed to this early solo effort of yours in between the Quartet and Lament albums of the Ultravox timeline?
I had never met Mick. I mean, I obviously knew of him because he was a consummate musician, a real artist. The interesting thing about Mick is he never wanted to understand the rudiments of music. He never wanted to learn, what the notes were. He played by absolute instinct and feel. And obviously I'd heard Japan, and one of the outstanding sounds that Japan made was that fretless bass. And they featured that, which is brilliant of them. And I happened to be doing, I had just recorded another cover version, No Regrets, while I was working on an Ultravox album with Sir George Martin. And George said to me in the studio, look, we're doing this Prince's Trust concert, and Pete Townsend's in charge of the band, and Phil Collins is playing drums and whatever, and we'd love you to come along and play guitar. So when I turned up at the rehearsals to play guitar, Mick was the bass player, and we instantly got on. Just like this weird thing, there's no real reason for it, but sometimes you meet people that you absolutely gel with, and we gelled instantly. And through hanging about together and just having the same sense of humor and same kind of musical tastes, we decided it would be great to try and write and record something. And After a Fashion was the track that we did. When you work with Mick, you kind of follow the note patterns that he plays. So, I'd play a set of chords and he would play notes and the notes would clash with the chords. I'd just change the chords. So we constructed this thing completely, in my little studio. Went off to Egypt, went and made a video in the desert and stuff. But it was meant to be the start of an ongoing project, but we were so busy we just never got round to doing the rest of it. But yeah, as a one-off single, I'm very proud of that.
I love the single so much. I actually played it on Grooves on the Record last night to promote this interview that's going to be played out on this show, and I think it's just an absolute standout of the early career. Of course, would not be remiss to not forget Chris Cross, who had his birthday recently as well, and of course as a principal founding member of Ultravox. What do you remember of him? Being a sort of this principal member who was always there from the start, and another fantastic bass player as well.
Well, again, it's that instant thing. The Ultravox are all lovely, they're all great, they're all wonderful musicians. But Chris and I instantly, just like it was with Mick, we instantly got on. We instantly connected. We were like brothers, overnight. And he was the last person I thought would go first. He was healthy. He looked after himself. Sometimes these things happen, and it's just your turn. But I found it devastating, to say the least, because there was always talk. There was always the chance that Ultravox might do something together. Maybe not tour, but maybe write or record something. And I think with the passing of Chris, that's sealed the Ultravox fate. So it's kind of like not just losing one friend, it's kind of like losing a bunch of friends because we know it'll never really happen again.
Yeah, it's a sad loss, and I remember playing Reap the Wild Wind to sort of bring in sort of that loss and sort of mourn his great legacy, but as well remember it as well. One of my favorite songs from Ultravox, and I'm so happy it's made the set, at least in the recent years, for our catalog, the hits, Love's Great Adventure from the catalog, Greatest Hits album, and it's been a favorite of mine since discovering the band in the early parts of 2020. Has this sense of cool, adventurous feeling. What was the initial inspiration for the song, and how do you feel about this song looking back onto it?
Well, that was an odd one, I have to say, because normally, Ultravox all wrote. Nobody walked into Ultravox, rehearsals with a complete song. You'd walk in with an idea or a riff or a chord progression or something, and you would build it. We would all build it together in the studio. So we were all equally, responsible for creating whatever it was we created. And Love's Great Adventure was the exception to that. Chris, the lovely Chris we were talking about a second ago, Chris Allen, and I had done. We got a mad phone call one day from one of our record company executives saying Levi's, the denim manufacturers, the jean manufacturers, are desperate for you to talk to them because they need some music for a commercial they've just shot. Now they shot this commercial with like Tony Scott or Ridley Scott. So they spent millions making this commercial. Decided at the last minute they didn't like the music, and someone in the room had said, "Oh, what it needs is something like Ultravox." So they called me up, and Chris and I wrote a piece of music overnight and gave it to them, and it was a massive success. Then they came back to us about a year later and said, "Look, we'd love you to repeat that, and can you do something for this similar advert for the same company?" And I wrote the piece of music, and they loved it, and then they didn't love it, and then they wanted to change it, and then they kept saying silly things. And I just ended up saying, "Look, it's a piece of music. I'm not going to change it. You go and find someone else to do it, and I'll take my piece of music." And the piece of music was the bones of Love's Great Adventure. We knocked it together in the studio, and out came this thing. It was I much prefer it as a song than a TV commercial.
Yeah, great music video as well, set in the African sort of jungles and, in this sort of like mini film in like reading this comic book. So very awesome one indeed. Well, that wraps us up for the 20 minutes. Thank you very much for doing this interview, Midge Ure. It's been a real honor to be given an opportunity to speak with you both for the Pulse and CineFM in Geelong and Melbourne, respectively, to discuss your new tour and your fantastic career, and something for our listeners that have enjoyed hearing your stories.
Oh, thank you very much for having me on.